Okay, picture this. You're in a courtroom and your fate is literally hanging in the balance. The big question is, who's sitting on that judge's bench? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive into a really fascinating analysis that pits three contenders against each other. You've got the seasoned professional, a jury of your peers, and a cold, calculating AI. It's quite the showdown.
So let's just get right to it. Who would you trust? I mean, really think about it. Would you want a legal expert who's seen it all, a group of everyday people guided by common sense, or maybe an AI that's been designed for perfect impartiality? The source material we're looking at is basically on a quest to find the best answer, or maybe, just maybe, the least worst option of the three. All right, first up to the plate, we've got the professional magistrate. This is the system you'll find across most Europe. We're talking about career judges who've spent years and years training for this exact role. Seems like a no-brainer, right? The obvious choice? Well, as you're about to see, the analysis suggests it's a little more complicated than that. So, when you look at the professional system, it's a real mixed bag. On the one hand, you get exactly what you'd expect, right? High-level technical skills, predictable decisions, that's the good stuff. But on the flip side, the source points to some enormous defects, things like corporatism and self-referentiality, which is basically a fancy way of saying judges tend to protect their own. Then there's the risk of ideological bias and, get this, a pretty shocking lack of accountability when things go completely wrong. And the analysis we're looking at really zeroes in on Italy's system as a perfect example of how these problems can seriously undermine justice. Two things in particular just jump off the page: a pathological slowness, their words, and an almost total lack of accountability. So let's see what that actually looks like in the real world. Yeah, you're seeing that right. 15 years. According to the source, that's how long a single legal case can drag on. And we're not just talking about an inconvenience here. The analysis calls this a pathological slowness for a reason. It can absolutely ruin lives, destroy businesses. It's a system that can deny justice simply by making you wait forever. Okay, so what about that accountability problem I mentioned? Well, check this out. Over a 70-year period in Italy, there were only 8 criminal convictions against magistrates for making malicious or seriously negligent errors. Just 8. The source points to this as proof of what they call near total irresponsibility. Basically, the people with the gavel are almost never held accountable for their mistakes. So, okay, if the professionals have some serious flaws, what's the alternative? Let's bring in our second contender, the popular jury. This is the classic setup you see in places like the US and the UK, where a group of your fellow citizens gets to decide on guilt or innocence. And just like before, the jury system comes with its own list of pros and cons. The big pros: you get direct democratic legitimacy and a dose of common sense in the courtroom. Plus, the source makes a great point. It's a lot harder to corrupt 12 people than just one. But the downsides are pretty obvious too. Jurors aren't legal experts, and they can definitely be swayed by things like a charismatic lawyer, emotional arguments, or a full-blown media circus. Now, this is where it gets really interesting when you look at the numbers. In a professional system like Italy's, the acquittal rate is under 10%. But in systems with juries, that number jumps way up to over 30%. And that, right there, raises a huge question. Are the professional judges just better at convicting guilty people, or are juries actually better at protecting the innocent? And look, you can't really talk about the weaknesses of juries without bringing up what the source calls the O.J. Simpson effect. This case is basically Exhibit A for how a jury's decision can get tangled up with charismatic lawyers, powerful emotional appeals, and a crazy media frenzy, sometimes to the point where it feels like the hard evidence gets lost in the shuffle. All right, that brings us to our final and, let's be honest, most futuristic contender, the machine. We're talking about an AI judge, an incorruptible, totally unbiased algorithm that's designed to apply the law with perfect robotic consistency. I know, it sounds like something straight out of science fiction, but this is a very real thing that people are seriously talking about. On paper, the promise of an AI judge is just incredible. I mean, imagine it. Justice that's instantaneous, perfectly impartial, and driven entirely by data. But the source argues that in practice, the problems are just too big to overcome, at least for now. Think about it. Who trains the AI? If you let the current judges do it, doesn't the AI just learn all their existing biases? And can an algorithm really understand crucial human context, like the difference between self-defense and cold-blooded murder? And one of the biggest hurdles here is something called the black box problem. Basically, it means that a lot of the time, even the people who designed the AI don't know exactly how it reached a certain conclusion. And if you're the one being sentenced to prison, well, the computer said so is just not a good enough answer. It's not legitimate. Okay, so let's recap. We've got the professional judge, super competent, but maybe not accountable. We've got the jury, democratic, but can be swayed by emotion. And then we have the AI, perfect in theory, but deeply flawed in practice. The source is pretty clear on this. There is no perfect system out there. So the real question becomes, which one is the least worst? So after laying it all out, weighing the good and the bad for all three, the analysis we're digging into comes to a really clear and maybe even surprising verdict on which system offers the best way forward for justice right now. And the verdict is in popular juries. Yep, you heard that right. Even with all the risks, the emotional bias, the lack of legal training, the source argues that a jury of your peers is, by a long shot, the best realistic option we have on the table today. So why juries? What's the thinking here? Well, the source lays out four main arguments. First, juries break the monopoly of what it calls the professional judicial caste. It stops the system from just becoming an echo chamber. Second, they reconnect regular citizens with the justice system. Third, hey, they've got a centuries-long track record in Anglo-Saxon countries, so we know they work. And finally, they don't have to go it alone. They can be assisted by a technical judge on procedural stuff. And just to be clear how strongly the source feels about this, it calls the professional magistrature the worst system of the three. The argument is that it actually combines the flaws of the other two while throwing in its own special ingredients, corruption and corporatism. But wait, what about our third contender, the AI? The source doesn't just toss it in the bin forever. The argument isn't that it's a bad idea, just that it's not ready. Yet. So what would it actually take for the machine to become a real, credible option to sit in the judge's chair? Well, the analysis lays out a pretty clear three-step roadmap. Step 1, the code has to be open source, totally transparent so everyone can see exactly how it's making decisions. Step 2, the training data, which is the foundation of its entire judgment, can't be decided by a handful of experts. It has to be decided democratically, by popular vote. And third, you have to start small. Let it handle minor, predictable things like traffic violations first, long before you'd ever let it near a major criminal case. So all this leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This entire analysis, you'll notice, is really focused on the Italian context, which it critiques pretty harshly. But what about in your country? What about where you live? When you weigh it all up, the competence of the expert, the common sense of the people, and the cold impartiality of the machine, who would you want judging you? It's a question that really gets to the heart of what justice even means.